It's April 2025. Exactly 5 years ago, I remember standing in the middle of our hospital hallway and thinking, this is not going to be over soon. Yes, this was the beginning of the pandemic that was supposed to be over in 2 weeks. But as we all know, it took much, much longer. I was working as a hospital chaplain amidst the uncertainty, the fear, and grief to navigate what was coming, what had already happened, and to really understand what it actually meant to be living through a pandemic. It has been 5 years since that day, and I wanted to come out here and share 5 lessons that I learned about uh, life and living and suffering. Whether you're a caregiver or somebody who has experienced deep grief and somebody who's still trying to make sense of all of those years, this video is for you. Today, I will be sharing 5 lessons that I learned about life, about how I serve, and how I stay grounded today. The first lesson that I learned is people resist change even when it's most needed. One of the first things that the hospitals had to do was to limit visitation. We could not allow people to visit their loved ones who are hospitalized. We were the in-between, trying to communicate with the family of a patient and with the patient themselves without allowing any kind of physical visitations to happen. This was a hard part. This was really hard, but there was such a need to make sure that we keep everybody separate in order for keeping everybody safe. We experienced so much misunderstanding and misperceptions despite the best intentions of everybody taking care of their loved ones. It was difficult to talk to people sometimes when we were trying to explain why we needed to do a certain thing and why somebody else or a family or a loved one could not be present at bedside when all of these changes were happening. These changes were hard for staff as well. Everybody who was working through the hospital system will be able to admit as to how difficult it was to say no, especially in crucial, critical situations where we had to just cut off and we had to limit people who could come in and interact. This was really hard. But even with that, everybody felt an internal resistance. There was a way that people just did not want to accept that this is what we had to kind of go through. And it was also a huge reminder that humans are resistant to change, because it disrupts one's comfort, it disrupts one's routine, it disrupts one's sense of meaning. And this was totally understandable from a spiritual care perspective, but when it came to larger conversations, the time limitations and visitation limitations made it hard to take the time to explain and really make others understand what our intentions were behind all the steps that were being taken. So one of the ways that I did learn to share how much I cared was to show up even when we were misperceived, even when we were misinterpreted, and even where we were misunderstood. That was one of the biggest lessons that I learned. The second lesson that I learned is that grief is deep, it's lasting, and it's personal. Grief extends beyond the normal understanding of what it means to be grieving something. And I even regret using the word normal, because what is normal for one person may not be normal for another. The key was knowing that everybody grieves differently, and grief looks and shows up very differently among different individuals. There is no cookie cutter approach to how grief can be shown and should be shown, and there's no template that is a clear step-by-step framework in how grief shows up in individuals. Experiencing and going through the pandemic as a hospital chaplain, but also an individual living through the pandemic with families all over the place, loved ones all over the world, it really expanded my understanding of what grief is. I realized that I could talk about grief to one person in one way because I have gotten to know an individual, but I may not be able to provide the same kind of explanation to somebody else who understands grief differently, who experiences grief differently. And it kind of pushed me to go deeper into how all of these things worked. One of the key things that I took away from this understanding, from this lesson, was to stay grounded, was to stay present, and to not shy away from the pain. While this is easier said than done, it was one of the most profound things that helped me navigate the pandemic. The third lesson that I learned was that presence doesn't require touch, but it does require intention. One of the things that, as a spiritual care provider, we're able to do is actually be physically present with patients and their families and our staff. During the pandemic, we were all wearing masks, sometimes we were wearing shields, and it made it really hard to communicate via just facial expressions. I learned that there were ways to express ourselves through our eyes, and really learned to use my eyes in a certain way to show that I was there, to show that I was present, to show that I was listening, and to show that the ones that we care for were not alone. One of the things that I also learned to do was also communicate through my voice. As chaplains, we do a lot of listening, and we try to minimize spoken words as we want to give space to our care recipients to really express themselves without us using our terms and trying to meddle with what our patients are saying and their loved ones are saying. So to be able to use my voice more was a learned thing, that using a specific way of expressing myself through mask, recognizing that there were still obstacles to how our care was being perceived. It was also important to recognize the use of technology at this point in time, where we relied on technology, phone calls, when we relied on technology such as using smartphones, using tablets to make sure that we were video calling with patients' families so they could see each other, trying to communicate with the patient's family outside of the hospital as well. So everybody was getting and staying updated on how their loved one was doing. And it was over those things. There were prayers that happened over phone. There were meditations that happened over, video calls. All of those things kind of became an important way to express that physical presence. Yes, it's crucial, but also that when it came down to it, that we were able to navigate around that as well. Another crucial thing that I learned was how healing the voice of a loved one is to somebody who is going through an intense situation. That one of the things that became important during the pandemic in the care that I was perceiving was when patients just really wanted to hear from their loved one. They just wanted to hear their voice again. And just getting that phone call was so crucial and such a leap forward in how somebody perceived how they were being taken care of. And this was so crucial when it's just going beyond just the physical presence, but also just being able to hear someone was phenomenal. So my biggest takeaway in this encounter around presence, not just being physical, not being limited to just physical presence, is to be intentional, how connections are energetic, and how being intentional about it makes a world of difference. So this may come across as a little bit of a bias, but I honestly do think, and I've seen it through and through in all of my years of work as a hospital chaplain, but especially during the pandemic, that in crisis moments, spirituality becomes a lifeline. Spirituality becomes a lifeline. This was lesson number 4. In crisis moments, spirituality becomes a lifeline. One of the things that professional spiritual care providers are trained to do is provide care across faith traditions, across spiritual spectrums, across entire spectrum of cultures. And that is one of our biggest strengths, to be able to hold many beliefs. As we navigated this care during the pandemic, it became easier to see that people wanted to be grounded. It became easier to see that people wanted to be connected, and they wanted to find meaning, and they wanted to feel that they were grounded. In all of this, taking care of staff also became crucial. While the focus was on taking care of patients and families, there was also staff who was also dealing with so much distress. There were so many things that everybody was trying to balance, and in all of that, it became important to remind the staff about the work that they're doing, is how impactful it is, how meaningful it is, and the amount of service that they're providing at that crucial crisis time. In some of the highest points of pain that I encountered during the pandemic, I was able to provide myself with a reframe that I was doing my dharma, and my dharma was showing up in terms of seva, in terms of service that I was providing to our patients, our families, our staff, and just to the community overall. And it became crucial to kind of constantly find meaning into all of this, because it was one of the steps to avoid burnout as much as possible. So one of the biggest takeaways from this lesson was that spiritual care just isn't an option. At its very core, it is crucial and it is healing. And the fifth and final lesson for now that I learned during the pandemic about myself was that I was capable of doing hard things. It became very necessary to quickly adapt to changing protocols within the healthcare system. Things were changing by the day, by the minute, and it had become important to kind of evolve the kind of care that we were providing to ensure that the needs were being met. One of the crucial things that I ended up doing during that phase was to remain resilient and was to stay on track to avoid burnout as much as possible. One of the crucial things I ended up doing to stay resilient and innovative was to stay grounded as much as possible. One of the things that I heavily relied on was journaling throughout the pandemic, and it's a process that I continue to do to this day. But journaling was a crucial piece to stay grounded as I navigated, the pandemic in the healthcare system. One of the other things that really helped me was mantra meditation and mantra recitation. Everywhere and every time I had just a couple of minutes while I was on the elevators, while I was taking the stairs, while I was walking through the hallways, just reminding myself that I needed to stay present and grounded as I navigated and as I continued to serve. One of the crucial reframes that I had to tell myself as we navigated the pandemic was recognizing that this work is service and that it is sacred. It is one of those things that we always talk about in spiritual care, how sacred our work is. But when it comes to crucial and high crisis moments where there is so much at stake, sometimes it's easy to lose sight of the fact that the work is important, that it still is sacred work. It became crucial that we were taking care of ourselves in all of this too. And then as I mentioned, these practices like journaling, mantra meditation, and also spending quality time with my family became crucial as I navigated, what it meant truly to be able to do, hard things. And that helped me kind of carry all of that understanding and lessons learned into the work that I do today and where I am right now. So these 5 lessons aren't just something that helped me through those years, but they're still something that I continue to reflect upon and continue to do the work today. It still continues to shape who I am, who I'm becoming, and how I serve others. And if you're carrying memories and losses and grief from the pandemic, over the years of the pandemic, you are not alone. And I want you to know that all of your thoughts and feelings and your loss, they matter. I hope that you are able to recognize and find comfort in your care, in the care that you've provided, the growth that you've seen in yourself, and recognize that all of that matters. If this resonated with you, I would love to hear from you about your reflections from the pandemic. I would love to hear it, what you thought about, what feelings you went through, and what helped you as you navigated the pandemic, and what helps you right now. I would love to hear from you in the comments. I would love if you would subscribe for more reflections, for more conversations around spiritual caregiving and how we navigate difficult life situations while staying true to who we are, to our cultural and spiritual heritage. I'll see you next time.